Yeah. Well, I guess should I explain to your audience what
Yeah,
we're
I think
doing?
yeah, good place to start is right
It's
there.
a good
Yeah.
place to start. Uh, this Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement I've founded where we're trying to challenge the legality of publishers selling you a video game for shutting it down after an undisclosed length of time, and then making it so that you can no sane person has a chance of ever running it again.
Hmm.
Occasionally there's these super geniuses who reverse engineer these things over years and
Yeah.
then get it. So not. And the thing is, the legality of that has not been tested in many countries.
Hmm.
And it's sort of like the analogy I always make is it's kind of like when Uber first came on the scene,
Hmm.
where governments weren't sure, well, wait a minute, are these taxi services? Are these employees or
Hmm.
contract? The law just wasn't written for something like that, and they had
Right.
to figure it out. And even though this practice has been going on, that specific practice, I think about 20 years, video games tend to get ignored by a lot of government and regulators unless there's something really controversial happening.
Right.
Happening. So there's actually possible openings in this in multiple countries. Unfortunately, not the United States. That seems very locked down from what I've seen. But Australia is one of them, where you are. I've been focused. I've been trying to push this in every angle I was able to find, which
Hmm.
was like 11. And you mentioned, and some of those were direct petitions to government.
Hmm.
Some of those have concluded, like Australia, Canada, UK part one concluded. That one was a weird situation.
Hmm.
However, we also have had a lot of success in escalating this issue at consumer protection agencies because there was a game that shut down last year that was kind of a perfect candidate to have this tested called The Crew, which is a big open world racing game by Ubisoft that they shut down. And that one was a great candidate because it sold a fair number of copies, at least 12 million, or at least 12 million owners. It got a little complicated. It also, so that meant we were still able to find people who had receipts of all this stuff because, a lot of people just get rid of it and never look at it again.
Hmm.
Also, they were located in France, which is one of the most has some of the most pro-consumer law in the world, which is excellent odds for us. And the other thing is, it's what I would call a clean kill, where they shut down that game. No one can run it in any form. It wasn't like, oh, they killed the multiplayer, but the single player still works, or they killed the DLC, but the base game still works, or they changed the game from 1.0 and 5.0 is totally different that people are upset about.
Hmm.
So it's like any regulator who doesn't understand anything about video games is probably going to understand this, where you bought the game, they didn't tell you how long it lasted, they shut it down, now nobody can ever run it again.
Hmm.
So it's like the planets aligned for to push that through. So that was one avenue.
Hmm.
And the other were the petitions, and the biggest of those is actually considered more than a petition. It's called the European Citizens Initiative,
Hmm.
where if we can get enough signatures on that, then we propose new law to the European Union
Hmm.
that says publishers would be required to leave the games in a reasonably working state at the time of shutdown without having to connect to them or other third parties or something like that. So yeah, that's the if we can get the signatures on that, I think we end this in a good way. But getting the signatures is hard. We're about 40% of where we need to be, and the deadline's at the end of July or early August, somewhere around there. So, and unfortunately, only European Union citizens are eligible. So,
Hmm. Well, I don't know if this might surprise you, but a lot of people in my audience and just in the Linux audience in general, there is like a very high proportion of people in the EU. I think my second biggest group is, I think it's Germany. Yeah, I think it's US and then Germany. So if you're interested in, you know, not just games like The Crew, but whether it's something like an MMO, whether it's a live service game, whether you're like any game like this, or just generally interested even if you don't play them, generally interested in consumer protection, this is something that you definitely should be looking into.
Yeah, I'll just give my quick pitch right
Go
now.
right
If
ahead.
you are in the European Union, or you know someone is, or you can get like a friend or family member to sign this, go to stopkillinggames.com. There's a button to click on there that will take you to the European Union petition, European Citizens Initiative. Just try to get more signatures if you can, because this is our best shot. Now, if that fails, we still have other shots with the consumer protection agencies, but I give all those coin toss odds based on, whereas I think we win if we do this, because that's another thing worth mentioning. Even though we're only talking about like the EU or Australia, if we have a win in one of those countries, I think globally, most gamers get the benefits downstream, because then the video game industry is going to have to think, okay, well, if we have to have an end of life plan to sell in Australia, or especially the EU, which is population of like 450 million, it's going to be a hell of a lot cheaper to just, add an end of life plan, especially for games we haven't made yet, for ones that are, in the design phase onward, than it will be to miss out on millions of sales in those. So they're just going to take the path of least resistance. And actually, in Australia, there's an analogy to this where when the ACCC sued Valve over not allowing refunds, and Valve lost the case, and after that, they just rolled out refunds globally because they probably figured, hey, it's not worth it in court fees or whatever to just keep versus the money we're going to lose from allowing refunds. And now it's pretty common practice to just be able to refund a game that you buy digitally. I think this will be the same thing, because if they make one end of life plan, they may as well release the others, and just be done with it.
Whilst you do say that, and I do agree in the Valve case, there are going to be cases like Apple is a great example here, with the way that Apple's handling their requirement to allow alternative app stores. Jailbreaking. It's jailbreaking. In the EU, they're like, okay, we're fine with this, but then specifically put in software locks for the rest of the world. Whilst most companies wouldn't go about that, and I would hope most would be like Valve, and they just say, okay, it's just easier like this, there are going to be companies that will try to sort of like implement it in the most minimal way possible.
Yeah, that there's a risk of that. Like you said, I think most wouldn't, because that's going to get bad PR for not much money.
Right.
But no, there is a risk some would do that. But even then, I mean, it's kind of like was Jurassic Park, life finds a way kind of thing. Like, because if it's a popular game and let's say only the French copy gets preserved, there's going to be people who are, if it's a game people like, they're really going to try and get a hold of that French copy and get like a translation patch or something. It's worth stating that this whole movement, it does not solve all the problems with games preservation. What we're really doing is targeting the worst of the worst, where when these games shut down, literally no one on the planet can run them again. So if we were to try to do more than that, you'd basically have to rewrite copyright law, and that would just that'll be 100 times harder than what we're doing. That would invite the likes of Disney, the recording industry, we don't want to go to, we're trying to keep this as contained as possible as like a consumer issue, so that, if you really want to play a game, it should be possible.
Right, right. Yeah, you don't. No one wants to get on the bad side of Disney or the what is it? The RCCC? No, the US recording.
RIAA.
That one, RIAA. Both are very litigious. Nintendo's bad enough. You can bother Nintendo, but at least like Nintendo doesn't seem to really engage in this, so they are like kind of off to the side.
That's another point I remembered, is another reason we might be able to get this through is this isn't like loot boxes, which I'm also not a fan of, but I'm not even trying to tackle that, where if some companies can't sell loot boxes, that's an existential threat to them because they're making so much money hand over fist on some games.
I'm sure you remember when there was that proposed Chinese law to, I think it was like to either limit it or completely remove it, and there was a bunch of limitations for how kids could play games and when they could play games, and all of a sudden Tencent stock just went like this.
Yeah, yeah, I think part of it was like how many hours they
Yeah,
allowed
yeah.
or something like that.
I know
Like
loot boxes were a
weekends.
part of it, but it was a bunch of stuff in it as well.
Yeah, it's so the cost of doing this again, if it's for a future game that you're still designing, it's very minimal. I mean it's going to vary a lot depending on what kind of game. Like an MMO is going to have probably very different requirements than something like an arena shooter with 10 people or something, you know. But for existing games, yeah, that's the thing with the European Citizens Initiative. This would not be retroactive. So if it passed, it would be from that point onward. And for existing games, again, it's going to vary all over the place. Some companies, it'll be as easy as just adding a couple lines to allow private servers once they end support, so you can just connect to an IP address and then they're done. Others, it might literally be impossible just because they have license agreements for like existing middleware or server software that there's like, well, okay, we do not have permission to give away this software.
Right.
Games like that, I mean, it would be up to the European Union in that case, but it would they would either have to be retired by a certain date or else they might get grandfathered in. So, you know, okay, if you were already operating a game this way by, let's say, a year or two from now, and the law goes into effect, okay, you get an exemption, but any new game moving forward, you need an end of life build once you end support.